get started. I'm thrilled to talk about Fjord Trends 2022. It's our annual trends report. I am Martha Cotton, and I'm one of the global co-leads for Fjord. I'm also have the pleasure of being one of the co-authors of our annual trends report. I'll tell you a little bit about what the trends report is, and then I'll jump into what they are for 2022. So, Fjord Trends are not tech trends. I want you to understand that what Fjord Trends do is they look at how humans are engaging with technology and design, and what that means for the ways we should be thinking about our jobs, what we do, no matter what industry you're in. So they really are sort of human-centered, human-facing trends for what's happening in the world. They're also intended to be things that we should be thinking about right now and taking action on right now. This is not like colonizing Mars. These are things that we want to be thinking about as we, especially very relevant for being here at CES, as we think about the future, as we think about the next 12 to 18 months. We developed the trends by leveraging our amazing global team of about 2,000 designers around the world. So starting in the summer, before we write the report, we go out to our community, our global design community, and we ask them to send us evidence of what's happening in the world. And that's how we start to slowly synthesize towards what these trends are. So these are truly global in nature. When you hear me talk about this is not just North America, where we happen to be right now. These are truly global trends. So just to whet your appetite a little bit, we're going to play a short video that gives you a bit of a preview, and then we'll jump in. Let's roll the videotape. Excited to hear the 5 trends. The visual design, I think, is stunning. I'm particularly proud of it. So I'll start by kind of introducing the meta theme. Now, every year when we do the trends report, after we start to kind of see what the trends are coalescing into, we start to see a theme that cuts across. And the theme for this year we're calling the new fabric of life. Now, what I think is really interesting, again, so as I mentioned, I have the privilege of being one of the authors on this report. So I've traced the themes over the last several years. 2 years ago, for our Trends 2020 report, we said the meta theme was a re-examining of all the fundamentals. We said people, organizations, brands, companies are going to be fundamentally rethinking just about everything they do. Now, little could we imagine when we wrote the report, which was published in December of 2019, what the year 2020 was going to be like. It was certainly a moment to re-examine all the fundamentals. When we released the report for the trends for 2021, we said the meta theme is about mapping out new territories. We're standing in a new environment. The world is fundamentally different than what we knew, and we have the opportunity to map the territory for the future. Well, the meta theme for this year, for 2022, is really about now we're in this new map, we're in this new territory, but we're starting to fundamentally re-examine all of our relationships with each other, with the brands and services we engage with our employers, with our healthcare. We are fundamentally rethinking these relationships and knitting together the new fabric of life. That's why we're calling it the new fabric of life. It really is about okay, we're in this new environment, we're examining these relationships and we're knitting together sort of the way it's going to be. You'll also notice, I did mention our pride in the visual design. You'll notice a sense of texture and of fabric throughout the visual look and feel of the trends report too, and that's very much on purpose. So that is the meta theme, and I want you to think about that as I walk through the 5 trends. And there are 5 this year. They really kind of run the gamut from thinking about who we are as people, how we show up as humans, how we engage with the world, how we engage with the metaverse, how we think about the abundant or lack of abundance on the planet, and how we're fundamentally thinking about care. Now, I spent a good amount of time yesterday. Actually, I walked 7 miles yesterday throughout the various floors. I'm sure all of you did the same. And I saw a lot that kind of helped me understand and bring some of these trends to life, in addition to all the wealth of evidence we have that allowed us to come to these trends. Specifically, the last one around care, I really, I don't know how many massage chair booths there were at CES two years ago, but there were quite a lot. And actually, that was nice. After walking 7 miles, I could get a little massage. Okay, so I'm going to jump in. I got notes because there's a lot I want to make sure I communicate. The first trend we're calling Come As You Are. I love this trend. I'm an anthropologist by training, and so my background is about kind of studying humans and how they engage with culture and in the world. And the thing I love about this trend is it really is about people being unapologetic about being who they are, not wanting to be put in a box. One of my favorite examples of this, just as actually from some research I did earlier this year, I was looking at consumers and how a sense of purpose really drives some of their choices. And I'll never forget, I interviewed this one woman who said, well, I'm a vegan, but I eat bacon on Sundays. And now, okay, that's a little contradictory, yeah? But essentially, it's great. It's a great moment that shows you how people are coming as you are. Unapologetic, this is who I am. This is how I show up in the world, and it's not complicated because this is who I am. So this is essentially what we mean by come as you are. So what we're seeing is there's this fundamental shift in how people are thinking about personal agency in their lives. And who is the key agent of their lives? Well, it's me. It's myself. And me as the key agent is driving the choices that I'm making. And so what we're seeing here is this is leading people to question everything about who they are and what matters to them, and finding confidence to kind of show up as they are. One of my favorite examples, I'm a big fan of the Olympics. I'm sure you all saw Tom Daley, the UK champion diver, contentedly knitting in the stands, right? He's a world-class athlete and he's a knitter. Take him as he is, right? But this also, I think, helps us understand and see the Great Resignation through a different light. I'm sure everyone here is very aware of the astounding stats that are out there around how people are reevaluating what they do and how they show up as employees and what they do for a living. 41% of the global workforce considered leaving work in 2021, and I saw just a headline just the other day, something like 4.5 million Americans quit their jobs in November. So it's very palpably real showing up in the world. And so what we're seeing is that companies in this great war for talent, given the Great Resignation, are competing with each other, but they're competing with a lot of other things as well. There's a growth in side hustles, people supplementing or replacing incomes in wholesale. You can see Etsy, which recently has grown exponentially, but recently acquired Depop, which is a fashion resale site. People are turning themselves into businesses. Another piece of evidence is Shopify. Shopify's growth was tremendous last year. They now power 1.7 million small businesses in 175 countries. So this also gives rise to a growth in the creator economy. This is the economic model where people are essentially, as creators, can directly make money from their audiences. 2 million of the estimated 50 million plus creators on YouTube, Instagram, and Twitch now make six-figure incomes. YouTube itself is expected to generate $30 billion in ad revenue from creators this year. And there's a rise in platforms where creators can offer exclusive content directly to their audience. Substack for journalism, OnlyFans and entertainment, Airbnb for experiences. So these are absolutely on the rise as people are coming as they are. But it's not just about creativity, this trend. I want you to understand it. This idea of coming as you are is affecting all aspects of how we show up as humans, and how we want to show up as humans. So I think what's going to be happening next as we deal with a world of people having a greater sense of their own personal agency, there's going to be a lot of interesting things, absolutely, in the workplace, and as employers kind of grapple with the war for talent. A lot of interesting moves are being made. In the US, Deutsche Bank, for example, called for the end of remote working. But while in Australia, tech giant Canva unveiled new flexible working. There was a study done in Southeast Asia where 6 in 10 respondents said that they would quit if not provided post-pandemic flexibility. So a lot of interesting things are going to be shaking out here. And I think the interesting thing to keep in mind over the next year, 18 months, is what come as you are means for our sense of individualism and the inherent tension that's going to play out as we kind of grapple with the me versus we. Right? And this is going to play out a lot in work environments as for those who are employers, but also as consumers engage with brands. Facing, all of us who are engaged with some sets of constituencies that we serve, be it consumers, patients, whatever, we're dealing with people who don't want to be put in a box. So we have to fundamentally rethink, how we engage with them, how we market to them, how we segment. A lot of this was actually discussed yesterday at the interesting CMOs panel we did here. So what do we think is next? We see a change in norms and rules for the relationships we have, again, with our employees, with the brands and services that we engage with our doctors, all the ways that we show up as humans. And we also think that employers are going to have to fundamentally rethink the benefits that they offer. Actually, one of the massage chair booths that I happened to stumble across yesterday mentioned that that one of their biggest customers is office environments. This is a benefit that you can now offer. Might be way more compelling to me than a company car or a rail ticket that I get through my employer. We also really need to think about that booster shot of we. We need each other. The rise in individualism is interesting, and it manifests itself in a lot of great, again, people being unapologetic about who they are. But there's also, we need to reflect on what we gain from the collective, and that there is a premium to having these collaborative, interactive experiences with each other. I think when we think about work too, we want to kind of understand the transactional versus relational aspects of work, so that when we think about the things that I have agency to do as myself, I'm balancing it against this relational aspect that's also important. So think about this tension. For all of our trends, and if you're welcome to download the full report, we have sort of a think, say, do for each trend. We really do want you to think about that we versus me mentality, that inherent tension that's going to continue to net itself out in all aspects of showing up as a human and essentially coming as you are. Okay, that was trend 1. Trend 2 we call the end of abundance thinking. Now, I don't know about you, but I've suddenly noticed late night comics are talking about supply chain. My 94-year-old mother knows what a supply chain is. My 17-year-old daughter knows what a supply chain is. So this has kind of burst into our general public consciousness, the fact that getting stuff is harder. And so this trend really addresses that scarcity, the idea of scarcity, and the ways that we experience scarcity through getting the things that we need or engaging in service experiences at restaurants that are understaffed, for example. So this notion of scarcity has kind of has risen to the fore. And it kind of lays bare, how many of us have taken abundancy for granted. Now, make no mistake, I think being able to take abundancy for granted means that you're coming from a place of having felt abundance, which is a point of privilege. But it's certainly kind of a wash, and we heard this overwhelmingly as we were doing our global research, that this is felt, this sense that scarcity is now here, it is being felt palpably around the world. But we do think it's a call to action, to rethink availability, to rethink convenience, to rethink speed, and kind of learn from what is happening. And design, I'm a designer, we want to design for scarcity. And recognize, I think really importantly, that less is not necessarily loss. So it's a mindset shift. We have to really think when we engage in the end of abundance thinking. Now you do notice when I flashed up the title slide, there is a question mark there. We're not actually sure how this is going to net itself out. But it's definitely manifesting itself in our day-to-day lives quite palpably. There's many headlines that we've seen about shortages. As I mentioned, even late-night comics are finding fodder there. But it manifests itself in things like, Massachusetts having to call in the National Guard to supplement their bus drivers for when schools reopened again. We all saw, the Ever Given container ship that kind of got stuck in the Suez Canal. Automotive industry impacted for sure in September. In Japan, Honda blamed shortages of parts for a 60% drop in production. So again, these issues, they've dampened people's expectations about sort of when can I get the things that I want, but also helping us really rethink convenience and speed. And again, our kind of calling right into our faces that abundance thinking has been impacting our lives. I think another thing that's really interesting here is that this trend, what's happened to bring on this trend, revealed an interconnectedness and interdependent world about so many things that are dependent on each other. Again, that's why people now can talk about a supply chain, because they understand that things are connected. And this interconnectedness, I think, has really risen into main consumer consciousness. Now, here's an amazing, I think this is kind of an amazing example of this interconnection. I have to read this because it's convoluted. Okay, a rise in world gas prices forced UK's largest fertilizer manufacturer to suspend production. So that resulted in a sharp drop in the supply of one of its byproducts, which was industrial CO2. This threatened the supply of items dependent on industrial CO2, which includes plastic wrapping for foods like fresh meat. So the rising world gas prices had a domino effect, resulting in fewer meat products offering on grocery store shelves in the UK. So kind of understanding that interconnectedness really kind of came home. And then obviously people, I think, have also started to see the impact of abundance thinking on the health of the planet, and the rise in natural disasters. Just last week, the wildfires in Colorado, for example. So this is affecting our collective morale, and we really do need to recalibrate that idea that less is not loss, and better, better does not necessarily mean more. Okay, now I know this is a bit of a bummer, this trend, because we're living in it right now, but we do see it actually as an exciting design challenge to design for scarcity. Supply chains are designed, we can design them in different ways. We can think about circularity, we can design for scarcity and kind of meet the challenge as presented to us right now. We need to, one of the things that I think is super interesting about this is decoupling innovation from the idea of new, which kind of feels funny for me to say this at CES, but I think that's actually a fundamental mindset shift that we need to take on in order to kind of grapple with what this trend is presenting to us. We do think there's an urgent need for the coming together of marketing, customer service, and supply chain Now, this builds on a trend we had last year, which we called liquid infrastructure, where that was a call to action to fundamentally rethink your supply chain as an opportunity for growth and innovation. So we want to redouble on that message. We think that, as we design for scarcity, we really need to think about this balance between affordability and sustainability. Again, re-examine our supply chains for that innovation, for growth, for circularity. There's also a growing need to extend the life of products. There's a right to repair movement that is rising quite rapidly to counter planned obsolescence that we all have in all our devices. But even H&M, which is a retailer, they have partnered with clothing platform Gemma to put two of their brands up for as rental properties. Again, and Rent the Runway, for example, has been around for a while, but this is H&M. This is H&M's clothes kind of entering this kind of rental model. And the last thing I'll say is that I think when these supply chains are fragile, it is an opportunity to examine them for circularity. And many organizations, General Mills to name one, is doing exactly that. So it is a question mark at the end of abundance thinking. And so this is something I want you to think about, and contemplate supply chain and see this as an opportunity to redesign, to designing for scarcity, and kind of meeting the moment in that way, seeing it as an opportunity as well as a threat. Okay. This trend, the next frontier, well, maybe you heard of this thing called the Metaverse. Certainly came home to roost in my house. My son, who's 19, he used his high school graduation gift money to buy a digital horse, which he insists is a phenomenal investment. We shall see. But yeah, so there we are. The Metaverse came quite home to roost. In addition to all the other ways, we of course have an Oculus and things like that in my house as well. But the Metaverse is not necessarily new. We've kind of engaged with Second Life in many ways, but it certainly burst on the scene. I mean, I know I'm speaking the absolute obvious to this audience, but what I think that the thing that is different now is that it's fully dimensional. It's a place to interact, to create, to consume, to learn, to earn. And so we think that a lot of the dimensions that are going on here with the metaverse, and the reason it's worthy of a trend, is we call them the 4 Ps: place, population, product, and purpose. So place, the metaverse is a place. Now when you go online, you might say, I'm going to CNN.com, but you're not physically going there, right? Now when you go to the metaverse, you are going to a place. And it's not just sort of a turn of phrase. There's architecture in the metaverse. There's spatial logic in the metaverse, right? You're engaging in an environment, and you have put yourself there. The second P is population. What are you doing in this place? You are engaging with other people. And so while there's been multiplayer gaming for a while, there's now other opportunities and ways to engage with populations in this place that is the metaverse. Netflix, for example, holding watch parties. Apple Share, where you can watch content together using FaceTime. And certainly there's a growth in ways of building out more realistic avatars and synthetic humans. Product is new ways of just realizing ways to make money in the metaverse. There's certainly, speaking to the creator economy that I talked about a minute ago, new jobs, and new ways to engage in buying digital products. Obviously, creators are minting digital assets via NFTs, but Burberry, for example, launched a digital collection. You may have heard a pretty famous story from a month or so ago. Gucci actually sold a purse in the metaverse for more than the physical version would have cost in real life. But NASCAR is also getting into the digital horse game. So there's a bit of a Wild West, and actually the original title for this trend we called the gold rush, because there's a bit of a gold rush feel about sort of getting products out there and figuring out ways to realize that value. But the fourth P is purpose, and to me, I think this is the most interesting thing, and then I think this is the thing that the trend hangs on, is that the metaverse risks sort of becoming yet another channel if we can't figure out ways for people to engage with it with a sense of purpose. I'm, as a risk of aging myself, I started my career in the 90s and was in a first wave of doing design work when e-commerce burst upon the scene in the late 90s and the early 2000s. And it was a very exciting time, and lots of my clients, I was a consultant then, a lot of my clients were very excited about ways to monetize the new economy, which is what it was called then. And then it sort of, the bubble burst and it kind of settled into, it's a channel. It's a way to get stuff done. It's a great way to get stuff done, but that, it's kind of part of the overall business strategy. And I think, to me, I'm reminiscent of that moment when I think about what's happening now in this gold rush feeling of the metaverse. And without that purpose equation, I think that that's what needs to kind of get netted out right now. Now, one of the things that's interesting, obviously we know Facebook, kind of dominant entrance or stated entrance into making meaning out of the metaverse, doing a lot with VR, but so is the US Army. They've adopted Microsoft HoloLens technology to use in training. And there's other ways of kind of manifesting purposeful, meaningful experiences. Megan Thee Stallion signed on with Amaze VR to star in immersive experiences. So there are definitely ways to kind of bring that immersion and purpose-led ways to engage in the metaverse. I do think that purpose will be the difference between utility, and we talk about this in the report, between utility and meaning. And kind of just helping us understand, how this next frontier is going to manifest and what's going to happen there. So, what do we think is going to happen? We do think getting this purpose equation just right. We also think that the metaverse has an opportunity to mark a pretty significant cultural epoch. I mentioned I'm a cultural anthropologist. This being a place where you engage with the people, it really is an opportunity to experience art, music, learning, movies, brands entirely differently. So in the same way, we're in the Venice and Florence in Renaissance Europe, or London or San Francisco in the 60s, were these cultural moments in time where we fundamentally started to engage differently with the world. We think that the metaverse has that opportunity as well. We do expect a lot of experimentation, for sure. We're seeing a lot of that here on the floor at CES, but we want to look particularly at advancement across sort of 4 areas. One is interoperability, and this is going to be the ability to move seamlessly between the worlds. So true to the idea of this being a gold rush, there are over 200 companies, I'm sure even more than that, chasing opportunities in this space. So will we be able to have single identities, or will we kind of, as we move from world to world, will we sort of change how we show up? A second thing is the quality of the digital assets that you purchase. Needs to be, will there be standardized, can they be standardized, so that the Gucci bag you buy in Roblox still looks good in some other, maybe even more realistic looking world. Third is actually the definition of what consumption means in the metaverse. Right now there's a lot of collecting going on. You can collect digital shoes, for example, which is fun and interesting, but kind of niche, and I don't know that really aligns with the purpose message yet, at least. So I think thinking about that value exchange and what consumption is going to mean in the metaverse is something else that's going to be experimented with and shaken out this year. And then lastly, but certainly not least, is the impact that we're going to feel with the dominance of the metaverse, both on mental health and the health of the planet. The metaverse represents other more opportunities for misinformation, for trolls, for just the mental impact of living life in another reality, and kind of how you represent yourself when you come to this reality here. And then the impact to the planet. One average NFT generates the same amount of carbon emissions as driving 500 miles in a gas-powered car. So these are things that are also going to be thought about and shaken out as this experimentation goes on. So think about this idea of the gold rush. Think about the 4 Ps. Again, place, population, product, and the 4th P being purpose as really key to understanding how this gold rush is going to net itself out. Okay, 2 more. This much is true is this next trend. So what I want you to think about here is, when was the last time you settled an argument by asking the internet a question? I mean, I think about my own family at Christmas dinner, when, just talking about Succession. When's season 4 of Succession? Let's ask the world. How many husbands has Betty White had? What are COVID Omicron symptoms? You probably did it today. I bet anyone in this room asked a question of the internet today. So this trend is actually about this idea of like a millennia ago, when we were questioning the phenomena of the world, we relied on magical thinking. So we kind of like, what's happening in the world? I'm going to use magical thinking to explain it. This gave way to the era of scientific thinking. As I thought about what's happening in the world and try to explain phenomena, I use scientific thinking to explain it. We kind of feel like we're in this era of questions now, and this is kind of we want to understand the phenomena in the world. What do? We ask the world questions. Now Google has been around for 24 years, and I don't know that no one had probably studied how many questions we asked of the world 24 years ago, but I guarantee you it's exponentially greater now than it was. We just are asking more questions. Now, this is interesting and great because we can get these questions answered. I can very easily find out how many husbands the lovely late Betty White had. But what is a side effect of us asking the internet, asking the world more questions, and living in this era of questions? It's an understanding of what true means and what do we do with the answers. We all know that there's a ton of mistrust in the world right now. There's record low levels of trust in all, in general, how we respond to the information we get, which is coupled with soaring fears around public safety, my role as a citizen in any of the countries I live on, my own personal autonomy, societal matters. So this is kind of palpable in sort of how we engage with the questions and the answers that we get. And it also undermines our trust in brands and in companies. We actually, I think Nikki yesterday talked a lot about some work we've done around purpose and how that is driving a lot of consumer choice. Kind of the idea of trust and purpose is now as important as price and quality as consumers make. This is a global study that we did as consumers make decisions around the products and services that they engage with. But this is, so this idea of understanding the truth and feeling trust for responses, I think is manifesting itself in all aspects of how we engage with the world. So we think that there's also kind of, as you engage with the world and ask questions of it, there's ethical concerns. People think about sustainability, fair trade. People are increasingly scrutinizing the brands and services that they engage with for traceability around the honesty, ethics, and sustainability practices. In fact, sustainably marketed products and services outperformed their conventional counterparts in 36 categories in 2020, and in 2021, it's only risen. So what's happening? Well, customers are actually asking questions, but they're expecting answers, and they're expecting answers at multiple points of interactions as they engage with a product or service. This, I think, makes life pretty complicated for the organizations that are offering these products and services to the market. And so these are, needing to provide these answers, needing to kind of be trusted with the responses is not something that necessarily a lot of brands are prepared for. So this is a call for transparency for sure, but it's also a call to really look at the information layers you have around products and services, and that's going to be critical for how we communicate that we can be trusted. So what's next? Well, the challenge will be dealing with both the limited space for information layers, but also people's limited attention span. We know that there's a lot of noise and clutter in the world as people engage with products and services. So it's a bit of a challenge to get that right, but also to kind of get the eyeballs and the ears that you're looking for. These information layers will need to be simple, they'll need to be easy to use, you'll need to think about the right information at the right time, but this transparency is really how to build that trust and to reassure people that the answer you're giving them to their questions can be trusted. I think this is also a rise around thinking about content design and conversation design. Content design is going to be actually key as brands' sort of macro purposes now need to be part of every crumb of content as it's communicated. And then conversation, again, will become really key here. People will want to engage in richer, more deeper information, and which will increasingly happening on demand as well. There's some really interesting things happening here. Bobbi Brown, for example, cosmetics, they've launched personalized online beauty consultants. They use AR, they use AI, and are able to offer personalized recommendations real time. And that's a really good example of what's happening here. So we do think that brands are going to compete with each other in these information layers, and the remit for design is going to become more complex. But the better companies get at designing information layers, the more trust they're going to gain. So that is, so think about the idea of the questions we ask and the ways people scrutinize and kind of the cues that they get for trust in the way those questions are answered. All right, last trend. This is the care one. So I mentioned, the massage chairs, just prevalence of, I don't know, maybe I just was on they struck me as I was walking the floor at CES. But the idea of care has kind of risen just in our general consciousness. My daughter is a junior in high school, and her first day of school last September, she came back. There had been a school-wide assembly, about 1,900 kids in the high school. And they were all wearing a rubber bracelet that said, "It's okay not to be okay." And so, this idea of care and moving center stage, giving us a language to talk about how we feel, how we're doing, how we're feeling, is very much at the forefront of the ways that we're engaging with the world. And when we think about Handle with Care, this trend, it's the many different aspects of care. So the challenges of caring for others, the cost of caring, the role of carers is just much more widely discussed. Now, I mentioned that when we collect these trends, we gather evidence from around the world. It was just amazing to me to see how much evidence we saw, similarities between Dublin and Dubai and Malaysia around this idea of care, around the rising ability to talk about mental health, for example. It was quite stunning. So we knew that this was going to be a dominant trend. So this does lead us to think about designing for care. And makes, it's an interesting, I think this trend makes an interesting counterpoint to the first trend, right? Remember I talked about come as you are and this sense of individualism. So care is really about how we are connecting with each other and the needs of the collective. So it's kind of an interesting bookend and the challenge there. But there has been this increased awareness. I mean, very memorably back to the Olympics, Simone Biles, her withdrawal from the Olympics, absolutely citing sort of the strain on her mental health. But also in employment contexts, in the UK, for example, 87% of HR leaders have seen more employees disclose issues around mental health. So people we have a language to talk about something that was just a few years ago, we did not have that language for. Care is also a differentiator for talent. We talked about the war on talent a little while ago. So adding care into the work experience. I saw a couple of booths actually yesterday when I was walking the floor around the idea of care and bringing palpable care, tangible care to employees. But for example, Nike, Bumble, LinkedIn, and Hootsuite, they all acted to support specifically their employees' mental health by shutting down their offices for a week. It's certainly in the language of Accenture where we work now, we're very much encouraged to talk about how we're feeling. And many conversations now with my boss start with, Martha, how are you feeling? And it's not just like, hey, how are you feeling? It's like an honest, like, how are you doing? Let's talk about it. So I think another thing that is relevant here is the stress and strain of care has risen to the fore. Certainly the shutdowns have a huge impact on families, needing to care for children, for parents, but certainly paid care workers. I mean, we see about I actually think I saw a stat just the other day. A lot of care workers are quitting in record numbers. There was one study that analyzed, it looked at 65 studies of care workers in 21 countries, and it found that 20% of those healthcare workers have reported anxiety, depression, or even PTSD. So there's, again, another dimension of what we talk about when we think about care. But we've also accepted text care in healthcare, which again, lots of evidence of that on the floor at CES this year. But it's both as a channel, but also as a solution. Pandemic forced the adoption of a lot of technology for healthcare and well-being. Telemed, for sure, rose to the fore, and then there's a lot more offerings to kind of introduce technology as a key aspect of your care. And the physical and digital are blending. Lululemon's acquisition of Mira, for example, is showing you how they're kind of bringing together physical and digital together into an overall holistic approach to care. Now, we used to say a few years ago, I remember saying that every healthcare is going to be every business is going to be a healthcare business. I feel like now we're saying every business is a care business. The language of care is embedded into how we talk about our customers, how we talk about our employees. I was on a call with my bank, and the call center rep, as we hung up, said, hey, stay healthy, hope you take care. So again, it's built into call center scripts. So we think that caring for ourselves and for others is going to be prioritized. And again, creating an interesting counterpoint with our first trend when we talked about the rise of individualism. So there's a couple of things to be thinking about when we think about what's next. First is expanding ideas of accessibility. There are certainly barriers to care, and even with the rise of telemed, it actually remains out of reach for many, many people who need care. 15% of the world's population, which is 1.2 billion people, have some form of disability, and fewer than 10% of websites have features that can that kind of support people with those disabilities. It's a very powerful video that we saw yesterday on the CMO panel from MasterCard, thinking about a credit card specifically for the blind. So we need to think about accessibility, and we need to kind of absolutely bring that into our language of care. Second, we do want to prioritize mental well-being and safety, and this isn't necessarily new, but we think we can start to embed KPIs into measuring care and thinking about how care can actually be a differentiator for an offering when we prioritize mental well-being. And third, exploring multisensory design to boost inclusivity. That's another thing I saw on the floor a lot yesterday. The rise of things that rely on touch, on smell, on other senses other than than sight and auditory. So it just kind of thinking holistically about how we might engage. We think this is a part of how we're going to manage thinking about care. And there has been a focus, at least in my world, on visual design, but now we can really think about other senses. And certainly the rise of podcasts, I think, also speaks to that as well. We also want to take, I think, when you think about the business of care and handle with care, taking a fresh look at the cluttered nature of the work experience. Are there things that we can do to streamline processes, to make, especially for those of us who work from home, kind of give ourselves breaks away from the soullessness of some of the interactions we have to have through technology, and really kind of redesign some of these systems of care. So I'm just about done. I definitely want to think about, as you're thinking about this idea of handling with care, acknowledge that the fact that we have a language to talk about it now, and actually it's going to be a differentiator and allow us to talk about ways to engage with those whom we serve, be they our customers or our employees. I think we have time for a couple of questions, if anyone would like to pose some. I know I threw a lot at you. Any questions? We will be doing some tours. A couple of my colleagues, Sandy and Carrie, there they are, have been scrutinizing the floor at CES to show you around and kind of talk about things that give further evidence that we're seeing just today and yesterday that are more evidence for these trends. Okay, well, thanks so much for listening. Enjoy the rest of your time.